The first time Eli whispered the words, Karen Foster thought he was sleep-talking. It was late September, the Vermont air crisp and curling through the half-open window of the small guest bedroom. Karen stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the 4-year-old boy she and her husband David had adopted only 3 weeks prior. He was curled up on his side, clutching a soft, worn teddy bear they had given him on his first night in the house. Then came the words. Barely audible, yet chillingly clear. My real mom is in the well.
Under the tree.
Karen froze.
She stepped closer. What did you say, honey?
Eli didn't answer. His breathing remained steady, rhythmic. He was fast asleep. She shook her head, heart slightly rattled, and whispered to herself, he's probably dreaming.
Just dreaming.
But she couldn't unhear the sentence. And she certainly couldn't forget it when Eli repeated it again at breakfast the next morning. They were seated at the kitchen table, sunlight slanting through the windows. David, sipping coffee and scrolling on his phone, glanced up when Karen dropped her spoon.
What is wrong?
Karen's voice was tight. Eli just said something strange. David raised an eyebrow. Like what? Karen turned to Eli.
Can you say it again, sweetheart? What you told me?
Eli blinked. I said, my real mommy is in the well.
Under the tree.
Karen looked at David, expecting him to react. He didn't. Instead, he gave a strained chuckle and reached over to ruffle Eli's hair.
Sounds like Someone's got kid the imagination, ou?
But Eli wasn't smiling. He looked out the window, his small fingers tapping nervously against his cereal bowl. She wore a blue dress, he added quietly. When she fell. I was there. But no one heard me cry. Karen's hand instinctively went to her mouth. David's smile had vanished. That night, after they put Eli to bed, Karen confronted her husband. Did the agency tell you anything about his background? She asked. About his mother? David, already in bed, groaned. Not much. His file said the mother was unknown, possibly a drug user, and dropped him off at a shelter outside Montpelier. I told you this. But what if that's not true? David sat up, his expression hardening. What are you getting at?
Karen's voice trembled.
He's not just making up stories.
The well, the blue dress, the crying.
David, we had a well in this backyard, didn't we? Before we moved in. David looked away. It was filled in years ago. When we bought the place, the realtor mentioned it. Said there was an old well under the big maple tree. But the cover was rotting, so the previous owners sealed it up for safety. David's jaw clenched.
You're chasing ghosts.
Karen didn't sleep that night. Over the next few days, Eli grew more withdrawn. He spent hours drawing, always the same image, a tall tree with a circular shape beneath it, and a woman in a long dress, her arms outstretched as if falling. One evening, Karen found him sitting cross-legged in the backyard, facing the maple tree. He had a small notebook on his lap and a blue crayon in his hand. Sweetheart, she said gently, what are you drawing? He turned the notebook around. It was the woman again. Her dress was blue, her hair long and dark. Beneath her, an open well, sketched in black swirls. At the top of the page, in uneven letters, Mommy. She sings to me sometimes, Eli said without looking up. When it's very quiet.
From the ground. Karen's blood ran cold.
She went back inside and picked up her phone. After a few rings, her best friend Julia answered. Karen?
Everything okay?
I need to ask you something, Karen said. And I need you to take it seriously. Julia, a retired journalist who had a nose for strange stories, listened carefully as Karen explained what Eli had been saying. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, you think there's really someone in the well?
I don't know.
But Eli, he remembers too much. Too clearly.
Julia hesitated.
You should talk to someone. Maybe even look into the property history.
All record, missing person.
Something. Karen nodded slowly. I think I'm going to. That weekend, she and Julia visited the town clerk's office. The property had changed hands 4 times in the last 20 years. But something on an older document caught Julia's eye. Look at this name.
Rebecca Monroe.
She rented the guest house here, 6 years ago.
Karen Starred.
She just disappears from the records after that. No forwarding address, no change of employment, Julia murmured. It's like she vanished. Later that night, Karen sat on the porch, watching the moonlight filter through the leaves of the maple tree. Eli had gone to bed early, complaining of a headache. David was still at work. She walked across the backyard to the base of the tree. The grass was slightly sunken in a perfect circle, just enough to be noticeable if you were looking for it. Kneeling, she placed her palm on the earth. Cold. When she closed her eyes, she could almost hear it. A faint echo.
A whisper.
Or perhaps just the wind, playing tricks on her. But the question lodged itself in her chest like a splinter. What if Eli wasn't imagining things? What if someone, Rebecca, was still down there? And what if David knew? Sunday morning arrived with the scent of coffee and a chill in the air.
Karen sat in the kitchen, her laptop open before her.
The screen glowed with an old local news article from 2016. The headline read, "Young woman, Rebecca Monroe, missing since May. Last seen in Brooksville." The accompanying photo showed a young woman in her mid-20s, pale-skinned with dark wavy hair that fell past her shoulders. She was smiling, wearing a denim jacket over a light blue dress.
Karen's Briscogt.
Blue dress. She looked toward the living room, where Eli was stacking blocks in silence, the TV playing cartoons he wasn't watching. There was a strange stillness to him lately, like he was trying not to take up space. Karen turned back to the screen. According to the article, Rebecca had been renting a guest house from a private owner just outside Brooksville, but her name was never released publicly. She was last seen by a neighbor walking into the woods behind the property. After that, nothing. No one ever found her. Karen copied the article into a folder she had quietly started on her desktop, Eli's Truth. David came in a few minutes later, dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Morning," he muttered.
Karen said nothing.
She watched him pour his coffee, the way his hands moved, steady and practiced. As if nothing in the world was wrong. "Did you ever meet someone named Rebecca Monroe?" she asked suddenly. David paused, mid-sip. "What?"
Rebecca Monroe.
"She was reported missing 6 years ago. Lived on this property. Rented the guest house before it was torn down."
David gave a short look. "You're digging through ghost stories now."
Karen stared at him. "Did you know her?" He met her gaze, expression unreadable. "No. Why would I?" "You were living here during that time."
David shrugged.
"Maybe the owners before us knew her. I don't remember anyone by that name." Karen wanted to believe him. But something in his tone, it wasn't quite denial. It was avoidance. That afternoon, while David took Eli into town for groceries, Karen returned to the backyard. She stood under the maple tree and slowly walked around the sunken patch of grass, now half covered in fallen leaves. A storm was forecasted for the evening, and the wind tugged at her hair as she knelt and began pulling away leaves and loose soil with her hands. She didn't know what she expected to find. Concrete. Wood.
Nothing at all.
But what she did find was a thin piece of fabric, faded and damp, tangled in the dirt.
She tugged it loose.
It was pale blue, the edge frayed and stained. A piece of dress fabric. Torn. Karen sat back on her heels, her breath catching. Her phone buzzed.
A message from Julia, meet me at the library. Found something in the archive.
Karen arrived 15 minutes later, wind-blown and muddy, the fabric folded in her coat pocket. Julia was already seated at one of the microfilm machines, scrolling through old newspaper clippings. She pointed to the screen.
Rebecca Monroe.
Before she disappeared, she filed a complaint with the Brooksville Police Department against her employer. A man she claimed was stalking her. Name wasn't listed in the article. But Julia pulled out a printed copy of a police log from that month. And here it is. The complaint was filed under a sealed name, but it's marked as being associated with this address. Karen's voice was barely above a whisper.
David.
Possibly. Or whoever owned the place then. Either way, it's tied to here. Karen's stomach twisted. Can we unseal it? Only with legal cause or police request. But we can request the case summary. On the drive home, Karen couldn't stop thinking about the timeline. 6 years ago, Rebecca disappeared. 5 years ago, the property was sold. 4 years ago, David discovered Eli at a shelter and brought him home. Karen hadn't thought much about the adoption process back then. David had said a friend in social services pulled some strings. Karen, recovering from a miscarriage and consumed with grief, hadn't questioned it. But now, it all felt too connected. Back home, Eli was asleep on the couch, a blanket tucked around him. David was in the garage. Karen went upstairs, entered the small storage room, and opened the metal filing cabinet David kept locked. She had secretly taken the spare key from his keyring weeks ago. Inside were folders, taxes, insurance, old house documents, and one manila envelope labeled E. Monroe, Medical. She opened it. Inside were immunization records, school enrollment documents, a birth certificate for Eli Monroe, born April 18, 2016.
Father, unknown. Mother, Rebecca Monroe. Karen s'en shook.
David had known. He had known everything. He had taken Rebecca's child. Possibly after killing her. Karen's thoughts raced. She needed help. Someone who could open a case properly, carefully, without tipping David off too early. She picked up her phone and dialed Julia. I found his file.
Elias.
And it says what we feared. Karen, listen carefully, Julia said. I have a contact at the Vermont State Police. We can arrange to have them come quietly. But you need to keep Eli safe, and you can't confront David. Not yet.
Karen nyöp en walket downstairs.
David was coming in from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag. She smiled. Everything okay? He asked. Yes, she replied, heart hammering.
Everything is fine.
But that night, as she tucked Eli into bed, she whispered in his ear.
I believe you. I believe everything you said.
And we're going to make sure your real mommy is never forgotten. Eli looked up at her with wide, quiet eyes. She's still singing, he whispered. But only I can hear her. Karen held him close, a single tear sliding down her cheek. Not for the first time, but for the first time with purpose. Tomorrow, she would call the state police. Tomorrow she would begin to dig, legally, officially, truthfully. And this time, she wouldn't stop until she reached the bottom. That night, after Karen put Eli to bed, she couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the fabric of the blue dress still clutched in her hand under the covers. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Rebecca Monroe's smiling face from the news clipping and heard Eli's voice in her mind, she's still singing. By dawn, Karen had made a decision.
There was no more room for doubt, no more comfort in silence.
Truth, as ugly as it might be, needed light. She met Julia at a small diner on the edge of town just after sunrise. The place was empty, save for a couple of early risers sipping coffee and reading newspapers. Julia didn't waste time. I spoke to my contact at the state police.
Detective Ramos.
He's handled cold cases before, especially missing persons. If what you found is real, if there's even a chance of foul play, he'll take it seriously. Karen slid the manila envelope across the table.
This is the proof. Rebecca Monroe's name on the birth certificate. Elias record.
All kept hidden by David. Julia flipped through the document slowly, her face growing more tense with every page. You need to be careful, Karen. If David senses you're onto him. Karen nodded. I know. That's why I need help. Real help. Later that afternoon, Detective Ramos arrived in Brooksville in an unmarked car. He was in his late 40s, with sharp eyes and a quiet demeanor. Karen met him at Julia's home, away from prying eyes. He reviewed the documents in silence, then asked only one question.
Do you believe your husband killed Rebecca Monroe?
Karen hesitated, but then said, I don't know what I believe anymore. But I think he took her child and buried the truth. Ramos nodded. That's enough to start. We'll need a warrant to search the property and investigate the area beneath the maple tree. But I'll be discreet. As Ramos left, Karen felt a strange sense of weightlifting. Not relief. Not yet. But momentum. She returned home before David. Eli was in his room, sitting quietly at his small desk. The walls were covered in new drawings. Karen walked in slowly, careful not to startle him. "What you working on?" she asked gently. Eli looked up and held out a drawing. It was a familiar scene, the maple tree, the circular shape beneath it, and the figure of a woman with long dark hair falling downward, arms outstretched. But this one was different. There was a second figure in the drawing now, smaller, standing beside the well.
Aboy. Karenès briscogt.
"That's you, isn't it?" she whispered. Eli nodded. "I tried to stop it. But I was too little. I was hiding in the bushes. I saw him push her." Karen crouched beside him. "Who did you see?"
Eliès en trembled.
He didn't say the name. He didn't need to. The door opened downstairs.
David Wassaume.
Karen stood quickly, smoothing her shirt and stepping out of the room. Eli stayed where he was, silently tearing a corner off the drawing and folding it into a small triangle. Dinner was uneventful, almost eerily calm. David asked about the day, about errands, and Karen answered with polite vagueness. They discussed Eli's school enrollment.
Nothing about Wells. Nothing about Rebecca.
That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Karen lay awake listening. At some point after midnight, she heard the creak of the floorboards.
David moving.
She slipped out of bed and followed at a distance, careful not to let the hardwood betray her steps. He walked out the back door, down the porch steps, and into the yard. The wind had picked up. Leaves swirled at his feet. He stood beneath the maple tree for a long time, unmoving. Then he knelt. Karen gasped silently. David began pulling at the grass, the dirt, scraping with his hands as if checking something. She backed away, heart pounding, and returned to the house before he could turn and see her watching. The next morning, Ramos called. "We have the warrant."
You'll be there tomorrow morning with a team. Don't tell your husband. Just keep things normal.
Karen spent the day pretending not to notice the dirt under David's nails. Pretending not to see the nervous twitch at the corner of his mouth. Pretending not to feel the weight of what might be waiting beneath the maple. That night, Eli asked to sleep in her bed. Karen let him. He curled up beside her, tiny and warm, and whispered into the darkness, "She's close. I can feel her." Karen stroked his hair. "She's proud of you, baby.
You're brave.
I remember her singing," Eli said.
She's too old me and them.
But then the sound stopped.
Karenès' voice shook.
"I'm so sorry you had to remember it alone." "I'm not alone now," he whispered. At dawn, the unmarked vehicles rolled into the neighborhood. Karen had already taken Eli to Julia's house. David was still asleep. There were 2 detectives, 1 forensic tech, and a ground-penetrating radar operator. Karen opened the back door and led them straight to the maple tree. "We'll start with the radar," Ramos said. "It'll detect anomalies in the soil. If there's something there, we'll dig." Karen stood back as they got to work. 30 minutes in, the radar tech raised his hand. "I've got a hollow spot. About 5 feet down. Roughly circular." Ramos turned to Karen. "Is this where the old well was?" Karen nodded, unable to speak. The team began to dig. 3 feet down, they hit concrete. Cracked. Ol. Improvised. Ramos gestured to the tech. "Break it." It took another 30 minutes to punch through. When the concrete gave way, a foul, damp smell rose from the ground. A flashlight was lowered in. Ramos peered down, then looked up at Karen. "There's something here." A silence settled over the yard as 2 officers carefully lowered themselves in with ropes and equipment. 10 minutes later, they surfaced. One was holding a tattered piece of fabric. The other shook his head grimly. "There's a body. Female. Decomposed. Still wearing a blue dress." Karen collapsed to her knees.
Ramos knelt besider.
"We'll need DNA to confirm, but I think we found Rebecca Monroe." Karen whispered, "She wasn't just a memory. She was real."
She mattered.
From the house, David stepped onto the porch, still in pajamas. "What's going on?" he called, blinking in the morning light.
Ramos stood.
"Mr. Foster, you're going to need to come with us." And as officers stepped forward to take David into custody, Karen looked up at the sky. Gray clouds hung low, but for the first time, she felt something like light breaking through. Tomorrow, she would tell Eli the truth. Tomorrow, they would begin the healing. The police station was quiet when Karen arrived. Her footsteps echoed against the linoleum floor as she followed Detective Ramos into the small interview room. David had already been processed, fingerprinted, photographed, placed in holding. Now he sat across from her behind a steel table, wrists cuffed, eyes dull. "Karen," he said flatly. "I was wondering how long you'd take." She didn't respond. Ramos sat to her left, silent, allowing her the space she needed.
"He trusted you," she said. "He loved you."
And all this time, Rebecca Monroe was beneath our tree.
David gave un smile.
"I kept her safe, didn't I? No one found her until now." Karen flinched. "You murdered her."
He leaned back.
"She was going to ruin everything. She said she'd take him away. That she'd tell the police I was his father, that I paid her to disappear. I gave her work, shelter. She used that against me. She was Eli's mother." "She was a threat," he snapped, then caught himself. "She was unstable. You don't know what she was like." Karen turned away. "I didn't want the boy to end up in the system. I thought, maybe it was the only thing I could salvage. I raised him like he was mine." "You lied about everything," she said, trembling.
"You forged documents, stole a child, buried his mother."
David's eyes flicked toward Ramos. "Is this your strategy? Send the wife in to wear me down?" "No," Ramos said. "This was her idea." Karen stood. "I'll testify against you. I'll tell them everything. You don't get to pretend this was mercy." As she left the room, David didn't call after her. Outside the station, the sky had opened up. Cold rain hit her cheeks as she ran to her car. Inside, she let out a scream that had been trapped in her chest for days. It didn't fix anything, but it cracked something open. That night, back at Julia's, she sat with Eli in front of the fireplace. He sat cross-legged in his pajamas, coloring a new picture. This time it was brighter, there were flowers, and the figure of the woman stood, not falling. Karen watched him for a while before speaking. "Eli," she said softly, "they found her." He didn't stop coloring. "I know. She was wearing the dress you told me about."
"The blue one."
"I remember hugging her," he whispered. "She smelled like the wind." Karen swallowed hard. She was very brave.
"And so are you."
"Is he going to jail?" Karen nodded. "Yes. For a long time." Eli's hand paused on the paper. "Does that make him my dad?" Karen took a breath. "Biologically, yes. But that doesn't mean he gets to be your father. A father is someone who protects you."
"Someone who tells the truth."
"Then he's not my dad," Eli said, setting the crayon down. Karen pulled him into her lap and held him close. In the days that followed, the town of Brooksville buzzed with whispers and speculation. The case was front-page news. A man, once respected in the community, now labeled a murderer. The well boy, as some called Eli, became a symbol of silent memory. But for Karen and Eli, life moved forward, slowly, carefully. Rebecca Monroe's remains were confirmed through DNA. Her name was cleared in the records, her story brought to light. A small memorial was held on the edge of the woods behind the old Foster property. Karen stood beside Eli, holding his hand as they laid flowers at the base of the maple tree.
A simple stone marker read, Rebecca Monroe, Docteur.
Mother.
Never forgotten.
Eli placed one of his drawings beneath the stone. It showed a woman with her arms out, smiling, surrounded by leaves. "She's home now," he whispered. In the weeks that followed, Karen filed paperwork to legally change Eli's last name to Monroe. The court process was emotional, but Judge Delaney, after reviewing the case, approved the request with little hesitation. The new birth certificate arrived in the mail one Friday morning. Karen opened it with trembling hands. At the top, in bold letters,
Eli Monroe. No more Eden. No more lies.
Julia came by that afternoon with cupcakes and a small blue balloon. "You're officially you," she said, hugging Eli. He grinned. "Can we go to the tree today?" Karen hesitated. "You sure?" He nodded. "I want to show her something." They drove back to the property. It had been cordoned off by the state, but a small area by the tree had been opened for family visits. The police tape still fluttered in the wind beyond the clearing, a reminder of all that had happened. Eli walked to the base of the tree, pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket, and knelt. "She used to read to me," he said. "Before. I don't remember the stories, just her voice." Karen felt her throat tighten. Eli opened the notebook and began to read aloud. It was a story he had written himself, about a tree that grew from a single tear and became a place where birds came to sing. "She's the tree," he said when he finished. "She watches now. I think she always did." Karen wrapped her arms around him. "And she always will." Later at home, Karen sat by the window with a mug of tea. The wind outside rustled the trees, and for a moment, she thought she heard humming. Not loud. Not near. But close enough. She didn't know if it was memory, or grief, or hope.
Mais Boltry.
Maybe none. But it didn't scare her anymore. In the weeks that followed, Julia helped Karen start something new, a small foundation, named after Rebecca. Its goal was to support children from undocumented backgrounds and unresolved custody cases, those who had fallen between the cracks, just like Eli. They called it the Garden of Names. Eli was the first name planted. The morning sun filtered softly through the windows of Julia's study, illuminating the spread of papers and documents strewn across the desk. Karen stood near the fireplace, her arms crossed, while Julia sorted through a stack of letters. "I've received over 30 responses," Julia said, tapping one envelope. "From families, mostly. Some are asking about missing loved ones. Others just want to say they're sorry. That they remember Rebecca now."
Karen exhalait.
"I wasn't expecting that. I thought people would move on." "Some do," Julia replied. "But others see a part of themselves in Eli. Or in Rebecca. Silence leaves a mark, but so does truth." The Garden of Names Foundation had officially launched the week before. They had set up a small office downtown, modest but warm, paintings by local artists, a play area for children, shelves lined with donated books. Karen spent most of her time there now, coordinating resources, answering calls, and listening.
Always listening.
Eli came by after school each day. At first, he was quiet, content to draw or read in the corner. But slowly, he began to ask questions. "Why do some kids not have birth certificates?" he asked one afternoon. Karen explained gently, "Sometimes people make mistakes. Or try to hide things."
And the children end up forgotten.
Eli looked at the nameplate on the wall that read the Garden of Names. "So we remember them here?" "Yes," she said. "We remember all of them." That weekend, Karen received a letter that froze her in place. It was from a woman named Angela Reed, a former social worker in Montpelier. The handwriting was shaky, but deliberate. "I worked in the shelter where Eli was supposedly found. But I don't remember ever seeing him there. His name was never on our records. I tried to report it, but the file vanished. I think someone made him disappear, and then reappear the way they wanted."
Karen sat down slowly, the letter trembling in her hand.
It confirmed what she had long suspected. David hadn't just hidden Rebecca's death, he had fabricated Eli's entire legal existence. The next morning, she brought the letter to Detective Ramos. He frowned. "We suspected as much, but this strengthens the case. If Angela agrees to testify, it could lead to charges of falsifying adoption documents, interfering with state custody, and more." "Would it change anything?" Karen asked. "Legally, I mean?" "For Eli? Not anymore. His new birth certificate is legitimate. But for Rebecca, it makes her story complete. It proves that she didn't abandon her son. That she fought for him." Karen nodded slowly.
D'était soit metteurs.
Later that day, she took Eli to the tree. It had become their place now. The police barriers were gone, and the ground had been seeded with wildflowers. Small stones bordered the marker, and children from the local elementary school had painted tiles with names, both real and symbolic, names of mothers, sisters, and imaginary friends.
Eli carriait un notebook.
He knelt by the tree and opened it, flipping past pages of drawings until he reached a fresh one. "Can I write her story?" he asked. Karen sat beside him. "Yes."
In your own word.
He began to write slowly, carefully. Her name was Rebecca Monroe. She loved blue dresses. She had a soft voice and smelled like rain.
She s'en y crier.
She never left. Someone tried to erase her. But I remembered. Karen didn't interrupt. She let the silence stretch out, filled only by the wind through the leaves. I used to think I made her up, Eli said. Like a dream that stayed too long. You didn't, Karen said.
You savais d'heure.
That night, they attended a community gathering at the town hall. The mayor had invited Karen to speak about the foundation, and to honor Rebecca publicly. The room was full. Journalists, teachers, parents, students. Some had come out of curiosity. Others came to support a cause they didn't yet understand. Karen stood at the podium, her heart thudding. My name is Karen Monroe, she began. I wasn't born with that name, but I chose it. Just like my son chose his. She paused. Rebecca Monroe was erased from our records. She was dismissed, forgotten, buried. But she wasn't invisible. Her son remembered her. Not with dates or documents, but with dreams and drawings.
With love.
She glanced at Eli, who sat in the front row next to Julia, his eyes wide and attentive. There are children all over this country, over this world, who are voiceless, who carry stories no one listens to. The Garden of Names exists to hear them. To write their names in light, not in dust. The applause began slowly, then built. It wasn't thunderous. It didn't need to be. It was enough. After the event, a woman approached her with a photo of a teenage girl. My daughter disappeared 3 years ago. No one believed me when I said something was wrong. They said she probably ran away. Karen held the photo gently. Tell me her name. The woman's eyes welled with tears.
Danielle. Danielle Rivera.
We'll remember her too, Karen said. Eli stood beside her and whispered, Can I draw her? Karen smiled. Yes, you can. Over the next weeks, stories poured in. Each name was added to a mural on the foundation's wall. Eli insisted on writing each name by hand, in crayon, in his neatest script. Names are how we find each other, he told a visiting class one day. If we forget them, we get lost. The children nodded.
Aboy resédissande.
How do we remember someone we never met?
Ellie tugt fort un moment.
We listen. And we care. And with that, the boy picked up a marker and added a name of his own. That night, Karen watched Eli sleep, his chest rising and falling steadily. She tucked the blanket around him, then sat by the window, looking out at the stars. Rebecca's face lingered in her mind, not as a photo, not as a ghost, but as a mother. A woman who had been silenced. And who now had a voice again, through her son. By the time Eli turned 10, the Garden of Names had grown beyond Karen's imagination. What began as a small community initiative in a quiet Vermont town had now reached national headlines. News outlets told the story of the boy who remembered, the mother who had been buried in silence, and the woman who refused to stop digging, for truth, for justice, for names. There were interviews, fundraisers, even a podcast series called Voices Under the Surface. But none of it changed how Eli behaved when he stood before the tree. He never smiled there. Instead, he stood with his hands behind his back, eyes fixed on the bark as if waiting for something, or someone to speak again. Karen noticed it more as he got older. Eli was polite, gentle, curious. But part of him remained distant, like he still carried the weight of the night he couldn't fully remember, but never truly forgot. One afternoon, while preparing a new mural inside the foundation's education room, Karen found him sitting alone by the window. Everything okay? She asked. Eli looked up, then returned his gaze to the trees outside. Sometimes I feel like I'm made of two people. Karen set down the brush and joined him. Two. One that remembers. And one that wants to forget. Karen placed a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to choose between them. Both are real. Both are you. He leaned into her touch, but didn't answer. That night, as Karen filed paperwork in her home office, she received an email from a school in Boston. It was from a teacher named Ben Hargrove. He had been following the Garden of Names since its early days and had started a student group based on the project. The group, made up of middle and high schoolers, had uncovered 2 cases of unregistered children in their own community, children living with distant relatives under assumed identities after domestic violence or trauma. The letter ended. We believe your son's story gave these kids the courage to speak. They didn't know they were allowed to be heard until they saw someone who had been. Karen read the email twice, then walked into Eli's room, where he was writing in a notebook. Do you want to visit Boston? She asked softly. Eli looked up. Why? There's a group of kids who want to meet you. They've been doing what you've done. Speaking names.
Telling truth.
He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Okay. The school auditorium was packed. The students had prepared a simple stage, covered in posters and drawings. Some had painted images of trees and wells, others of faces without names, all leading to one central banner that read,
Oui, remember.
When Eli stepped up to the microphone, he was nervous. He cleared his throat, looked down at the index cards he'd written, then looked up again. I was 4 when I remembered something no one wanted to believe, he began. I didn't know the words for it. I just saw a tree. And a well.
And a woman in blue who never said goodbye.
He paused, the room utterly still. People thought it was imagination. But sometimes memory lives in pictures and dreams.
It whispers when the world is too loud to hear.
He looked at the students in the front row.
Your stories matter, too.
Even if no one's listened yet. Especially if no one has listened yet.
The applause was gentle, warm.
Karen watched from the back, her heart full and aching. Afterward, students came up to talk. Some brought their drawings. Others just said thank you. One girl handed Eli a folded note and walked away without a word. Later in the car, he opened it.
My name is Lila.
I never told anyone my mom used to hurt me. But now I think maybe I can. Because you said we're allowed to speak. Thank you. P.S. I think your mom sings through the leaves. Eli folded the note and held it against his chest. Back in Vermont, Karen received a call from Detective Ramos. David Foster's trial has been set. January. Karen stood still, holding the phone tightly. I thought we had more time. Time doesn't wait, Ramos said. The DA is confident. The charges are strong: murder, concealment of remains, forgery, child endangerment. But they may ask Eli to testify. Karen's grip tightened. He's just a child. He wouldn't be cross-examined harshly. It would be a statement, supervised. Voluntary. Karen didn't respond. That evening, after dinner, she sat across from Eli at the kitchen table. They may ask you to speak at the trial, she said carefully. You don't have to. But it might help people understand what happened. Eli thought for a long time. Would it help her? He asked. Karen nodded. Yes. It would help her story be told completely. He said nothing more. Weeks passed.
Winter came.
Snow dusted the roof of the foundation building and turned the backyard maple tree into a bare skeleton against the gray sky. The trial began in mid-January. Karen and Eli sat in the second row of the courtroom. David was brought in, older, thinner, but still carrying the same coldness in his eyes. He didn't look at them. When it was Eli's turn, the room fell silent. He walked slowly to the stand, small in the oversized wooden chair, and faced the judge. The prosecutor guided him gently. Eli, do you remember when you first began to speak about the tree and the well? He nodded. Yes.
Can you tell us what you saw?
Eli took a breath. I was hiding in the bushes. I saw him push her. She wore blue. She screamed. But the ground swallowed the sound. And who did you see push her? Eli looked across the courtroom and pointed. Him.
David stared at the boy.
For a moment, his eyes flickered. Rage? Remorse?
No one could say.
But he didn't speak. The courtroom held its breath. The prosecutor asked no more. As Eli stepped down, a murmur ran through the room, people wiping tears, some whispering prayers, others simply sitting in silence. Outside, as snow began to fall again, Eli looked up at the sky. She's not underground anymore, he said. Karen wrapped her arms around him.
No, sweetheart.
She's not.
The trial lasted 7 days.
On the 8th, the verdict came in. Guilty. David Foster was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom sat in heavy silence as the judge read the sentence aloud, her voice echoing between the high wooden walls. There were no cheers, no loud reactions, just a collective breath held, then released. Karen closed her eyes. Eli sat still, hands folded in his lap, staring ahead. He didn't cry. He didn't move. When the judge looked at him and thanked him for his courage, he nodded once. Later that evening, they returned to the house. The warmth of home felt both strange and comforting. The world outside had changed, but inside, their lives had not yet caught up. Karen poured tea while Eli sat at the dining table, leafing through his old drawings. "Does it feel finished?" he asked quietly. She hesitated. "Does what feel finished? His story? Or mine? Or hers?" Karen sat beside him. Maybe not finished, but turned. Like a page in a book. Eli tapped his fingers on a sketch of the tree. "People at school keep asking if I feel better now. I don't know what to tell them." "You don't owe them answers. But they keep looking at me like I'm special. Like I'm something I don't understand." Karen didn't speak right away. Then she said, "You are special, Eli. But not because of what happened to you. Because of how you carried it. Because of who you chose to be." He looked at her. "What if I don't want to be that person forever?" "You won't be. You're allowed to grow. Change. Be angry. Be happy. Forget some days and remember on others. You don't have to be anything but yourself." A soft knock on the front door interrupted them. Julia stood on the porch, bundled in a thick coat, a folder tucked beneath her arm. "I know it's late," she said, "but I thought you'd want to see this." Inside, she opened the folder and laid out a proposal. "A publisher wants to turn the story into a book," she explained.
Note à Sensational One.
A memoir. Told through Karen's voice. And possibly through Eli's drawings. Karen stared at the pages. "Is it too soon?"
Julia shook her head.
"You don't have to say yes. But people are asking for more."
Note the drama. The healing.
Eli looked up. "If it helps someone else remember their tree, maybe it's okay." That night, Karen sat by the window and wrote the first line. He said, "My real mom is in the well," and I laughed. But that night, I didn't sleep. By spring, the snow had melted. The foundation bloomed, literally and figuratively. The mural wall was now so full of names they began rotating panels every season. Schools across the state adopted curriculum based on memory literacy, teaching children to trust their instincts, to speak up, to document what they felt even if it wasn't understood by adults. Eli gave his first workshop at 12. He stood before a group of middle schoolers, hands tucked in his hoodie pockets, and said simply, "I remembered something no one else did. And it made me feel like a ghost."
Aguerre le résé de rende.
"What helped you not feel like that anymore?" Someone listened. Karen watched from the back of the room, proud but cautious. For all the power Eli had found in speaking, she knew the burden that followed. Later, as they walked to the car, Eli asked, "Do you think people will stop asking me to tell it someday?"
Karen took fort un moment.
"Maybe. Or maybe they'll ask you different things. Not about what happened, but about what you want to become." "I want to become someone who builds things. Not just remembers." "Then that's what you'll do." In June, Eli was invited to Washington, D.C. to accept the National Youth Advocate Award. It was a formal ceremony, black suits and long speeches. But when Eli stepped on stage, he kept it simple.
"I'm not brave all the time.
I'm just someone who remembered. And who didn't stop." The room gave him a standing ovation. But as he stepped off the stage, he told Karen quietly, "That doesn't feel like winning."
Juste surviving.
"You've done more than survive," she said. "You've cleared the ground for others to stand on." Months passed. A quiet returned, not silence, but steadiness. Karen received a letter from a woman in rural Wyoming. "My son keeps drawing the same house. One we've never lived in. He says it's where his real mommy sleeps. I used to tell him not to talk about it. But now I'm listening." Another came from a grandfather in New Mexico. "I raised my granddaughter after her mother died. I thought hiding the truth would protect her. But she found a name in the attic. I told her everything last night. She cried and then smiled. Thank you. The well had opened far more than one truth. It had unsealed others, buried names, broken lines, forgotten songs.
One evening, Karen and Ellie walked through the foundation garden.
The flowers around the tree bloomed wildly, but there was peace in their chaos. Like nature saying, it's okay to grow after destruction.
Can I tell you something?
Eli said. Of course. Sometimes I still hear her.
Not singing anymore.
Just breathing.
Like she's here.
Karen smiled gently. Maybe she is. She doesn't feel sad now.
Just stay.
Karen reached for his hand. She's resting. Because she knows you're okay. They sat under the tree until dark. No cameras. No speeches. Just a boy who remembered and a mother who believed. And above them, the wind moved through the branches, not whispering anymore, but simply being. The years moved quietly. By the time Eli turned 15, the town of Brooksville had changed, not in architecture or population, but in the way people looked at one another. They asked more questions. They listened more carefully. The community, once so eager to bury what it didn't understand, had learned to let memory live. The maple tree behind the old house still stood, but the land surrounding it had been converted into a memorial garden, maintained by volunteers from the Garden of Names. It was open year-round. People left drawings, photos, tokens of stories unspoken. A place where the erased could be reimagined, remembered. Eli no longer visited the tree every week. He didn't need to. The tree, in some strange way, had come with him. In his notebooks. In his sketches. In the way he now stood when he spoke, feet grounded, hands open, voice clear. He had become an advocate, not just for memory, but for resilience. At school, Eli was still known by most as that kid.
The boy who remembered the well.
The son of a murdered woman and a convicted man. But Eli no longer flinched when he heard the whispers. He was no longer defined by what others assumed he carried. One autumn day, during a history class assignment on personal heritage, a classmate asked, "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened? That you didn't remember anything?" Eli thought for a long time before answering. "I used to. But now, if forgetting means someone else stays buried, then no. I don't wish that anymore." After class, the teacher pulled him aside. She was new to the school, unfamiliar with his full story, but moved. "I've never had a student say something like that," she said. Eli gave a small shrug. "It's just the truth." Outside the classroom, life went on. Karen continued her work at the foundation, now expanded with branches in 3 states. The Garden of Names had become more than a resource center, it was a movement. Legislators began consulting with Karen and Julia on reforms around child protection records and missing persons protocols. And through it all, Karen remained a mother first. One night, she found Eli sitting on the porch, legs pulled up, hoodie over his head, staring out at the streetlights. "Thinking about something?" she asked, sitting beside him. "I got an email from a filmmaker," he said. "She wants to make a documentary about me. About Rebecca. About everything." Karen waited.
"Do you want that?"
"I'm not sure." He paused. "What if it just becomes another thing people consume and forget?" "It depends on how you tell it," Karen said. "You don't owe anyone your pain. But if it helps others find their truth, that's something." He nodded. "I told her I'd think about it." Later that week, a group of students from Chicago arrived in Brooksville. They were part of a youth writing program inspired by the Garden of Names. They came to visit the tree, tour the foundation, and meet Eli. Eli didn't want to lead the tour at first. "I'm not a guide," he said.
"I'm not a symbol."
But as the students gathered in the memorial garden, reading the names aloud, placing handwritten poems by the roots of the tree, Eli stepped forward. "My name is Eli," he began.
"You said to think he was made of broken memory."
"That remembering made me weak." He looked down for a moment. "But I've learned that remembering is a kind of building. Every name we speak becomes a step someone else can climb." The students watched him in silence, some with tears in their eyes, others scribbling down his words. A girl in the front, no older than 10, raised her hand. Did you ever meet her? Your real mom? Eli's voice didn't shake when he answered. I don't remember her face. But I remember her holding me. Singing. And I remember the silence when it stopped. That silence stayed with me for years. Until someone finally said, I believe you. He turned slightly, gesturing to Karen.
She made space for my voice.
And because of that, I can make space for yours. Afterward, the children hugged him one by one. Karen watched from a distance, her heart aching in the best way. That night, Eli sat at his desk and began sketching a new series of drawings. Not of wells or trees or falling women, but of hands reaching upward. Some small, some wrinkled, some clasped together. He titled the collection, Echoes That Build. In a private letter to the filmmaker, he wrote, You can tell my story. But tell it slowly. Tell it like wind in leaves, like breath between words. Tell it like a boy who looked down into darkness, and still chose to speak. And tell them I'm not the only one. Not anymore.
Spring came again. Karen planted new lavender by the tree, the soft purple bloom like whisper of peace.
Julia visited more often, now partially retired, but still sharp and fierce when needed. They talked often about what would come next, not just for the foundation, but for the narrative. Would Eli continue to speak? Would he step back? They agreed, the decision would always be his. One evening, as the stars came out, Eli stood in the garden, reading the names on the latest panel. He traced his fingers across the painted letters, mothers, sons, daughters, fathers. Some were real. Some were symbols. But all were remembered. Do you think people stop needing to be heard when they die? He asked Karen beside him. She thought for a long moment. No. I think we're always echoing through someone. Eli nodded, watching the breeze stir the petals of the flowers. Then I'll keep building. Until there's nowhere left to hide a name. And with that, he walked toward the house, not in grief, not in burden, but in promise. Eli turned 18 in early spring. It was the kind of quiet birthday he preferred, no big party, no speeches, just a dinner with Karen and Julia, a lemon cake, and a handmade card from a group of middle schoolers who had named their writing room the Eli Monroe Room. After dinner, Karen gave him a small wooden box. Inside was a key. It's to the old house, she said. I bought it back last year. Quietly.
Figured-one de you de want it.
Eli stared at the key for a long time. He hadn't set foot in the house where it all began since the investigation. Since the body had been found, and his childhood rewritten. Thank you, he said softly. That weekend, Eli returned to the house alone.
The door creaked open.
The air smelled of dust and memory. He walked through the kitchen, the living room, the hole where he used to drag toy trains and bounce a rubber ball. Everything was empty.
The walls, stripped.
The rooms bare. But not hollow. When he reached the backyard, the tree was still there, taller now, its roots more deeply tangled with the earth. The garden had shifted around it, grown in wild, messy beauty. Eli stood under its shade for a long time. Then he sat down and opened his journal. I'm not here to mourn. I'm here to witness.
I'm not here to break.
I'm here to build. She was buried in silence. I was raised by the echo. That evening, Karen asked him what it felt like. Strange, he said. Like standing in a book I've already read, but the ending keeps changing. He paused.
You want to make something new.
Over the following months, Eli began college courses in architecture and community design. Not because it felt expected, but because it felt honest. I want to design places where people feel safe telling the truth, he explained once in an interview. Spaces that listen back. His designs included a library with a memory garden in the center. A youth shelter shaped like an open book. A courthouse waiting room with walls that changed color based on ambient noise, softening the weight of silence. His professors called him visionary. Eli just called it survival turned outward. Meanwhile, the Garden of Names had grown into a national nonprofit, with branches in 7 states. Karen had stepped back from day-to-day operations, handing leadership to a team of survivors turned advocates. She now focused on research and writing, chronicling stories that no system had ever documented. She and Eli co-authored a book called We Named the Silence, part memoir, part field guide, part love letter to memory itself. It became a bestseller. But more than the recognition, it gave people something to hold, a proof that truth, once unearthed, could plant roots and bloom. Eli's story was taught in social work classrooms. His testimony became a case study in trauma-informed education. Yet, with every honor, he grew more careful. "I don't want to become a symbol people quote and forget," he told Julia one afternoon. "I want to be useful."
She logued.
"Symbols can be useful too, Eli. But I get it. You're not an idea, you're a builder." One autumn evening, Eli visited a high school in Maine to speak with a group of students running their own memory mural project. Afterward, a boy approached him. "Did you ever forgive him?" the boy asked.
"The man who did it."
Eli was quiet. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "Some days I think I did. Other days I know I didn't. But forgiveness isn't a door you open once. It's a hallway.
You walk it a little every day." The boy nodded slowly. "My dad hurt my mom.
She left. I don't know where she went. But I think about her every night." Eli looked at him gently. "Then keep thinking about her. That's where remembering starts." That night, he wrote in his journal. "Maybe remembering isn't holding on.
Maybe it's letting go, slowly."
So both of you can keep walking. One morning in early winter, a letter arrived at the foundation addressed to Eli. The handwriting was familiar. It was from David Foster. Karen found Eli staring at the envelope. "You don't have to read it," she said. "You owe him nothing." "I know," Eli replied. "But maybe I owe it to myself." Inside, the letter was brief. "I heard about your work. About the foundation. I won't ask for forgiveness. But I wanted you to know.
I see you now.
I didn't back then. And I'm sorry for that. That's all."
No name.
Just an initial, D. Eli didn't cry. He didn't tear it up. He placed it in a drawer of his desk labeled Unfinished. That same week, he gave a speech at a university conference titled Justice Beyond the Verdict. He began with a quote from his own journal. "Some truths don't end when spoken. They just find new places to echo." He talked not just about his mother, or the well, or the trial. He talked about systems. About silence as architecture. About building rooms where people don't have to shout to be heard. After the speech, a woman in the audience approached him. "My daughter used to talk about shadows in her closet," she said. "We ignored it. Thought it was imagination. Then she stopped talking altogether." Eli looked into her eyes.
"It's never too late to believe her."
Karen watched her son from across the room, no longer the boy at the well, but the man who built bridges over buried names. As they walked back to the hotel, snow falling softly around them, Karen asked, "Do you still hear her sometimes?" Eli didn't hesitate. "Yes. But now it's different." He looked up at the sky.
"She's not calling out. She's singing."
"And it's not a song of sadness anymore." Karen smiled.
"What kind of song is it?"
Eli turned to her. "Home." Years passed. The tree remained. By the time Eli was 24, the maple behind the old Foster house had become a landmark, not a monument in the grand sense, but something quieter, more sacred. Children on field trips placed paper leaves around its roots. Survivors came with names scribbled on ribbon, tying them to the branches. Some cried. Others knelt in silence. The town had changed with it. Brooksville was no longer the kind of place where secrets settled in soil. It had become known for its compassion, its memory, its willingness to face what others buried. And still, Eli came back. Not every day.
Not for ritual.
But when it called. He would sit at the bench beneath the tree, journal in hand, sometimes sketching, sometimes writing, sometimes only listening. The leaves, now broader and golden with age, whispered in the breeze like pages turning. Karen had retired from the front lines of advocacy and now ran a small writing workshop in town, helping young people tell their stories. She walked with a cane these days, more from years of standing and traveling than from age, but her voice remained unshaken. Julia, older but ever tenacious, had become the honorary chair of the Garden of Names National Board. Under her stewardship, the foundation had launched a scholarship program for youth advocates across the country, named after Rebecca. Eli chaired the selection committee. On the 10th anniversary of the well's discovery, the town held a public commemoration. People came from all over the country. Not to mourn, but to mark. Eli stood in front of the crowd gathered around the tree, his voice firm. 10 years ago, I said that remembering is a kind of building. That each name spoken was a step upward.
Isti believ det.
He paused, his gaze scanning the faces of those who had come, survivors, advocates, parents, children. But I've learned something else too. Remembering alone is not enough. We remember so we can reimagine. So we can rebuild. He held up a hand-painted plaque. It read,
The Rebecca Monroe Center for Listening and Justice.
The center would be built on the property adjacent to the tree. It would house counselors, legal advocates, artists, and social workers. A sanctuary for those who felt invisible. A place not to revisit trauma, but to reclaim voice. The audience stood in silence as Eli placed the first stone, carved with the word, listen. That evening, Karen joined him at the bench beneath the tree. Do you remember what you said the first time I brought you here? She asked, leaning gently on her cane. He nodded. I said, she's down there. And I laughed, Karen said. But I didn't laugh for long. They sat together, two survivors of the same storm, watching the sun sink behind the hills. I think she would have loved this place, Eli said. Karen smiled. She's in every part of it. The wind picked up, scattering leaves in gentle spirals. Later that week, Eli received a package from a filmmaker in Los Angeles. Inside was a rough cut of the documentary she had been working on for 5 years. It was titled Beneath the Maple Tree. The final scene showed Eli as a child, his voice from an old recording saying, she's singing. I can hear her. Then it faded to black. Eli sat alone in the dark living room and wept, not from sorrow, but from relief. The kind that comes only after a truth has been fully held, fully honored, fully released. The documentary aired that winter and reached millions. Letters poured in. Some were from parents who had finally listened to their children. Others were from adults who had never been believed as kids, finally finding words for what they had buried.
One letter read.
I'm 72. My mother disappeared when I was 5. Everyone said she left. I never believed that. After seeing your story, I looked again. I found her name in a county file, misspelled, ignored. I found her. Thank you. You gave me back her name. Eli wrote back. One sentence.
Oui car what auteur forget until the world is ready to remember.
In the spring, construction on the center began. Eli worked with architects to design each room intentionally, rounded corners to avoid harshness, sound-absorbing panels to create warmth, skylights so that even on cloudy days, there was light. One of the final touches was a circular stone room at the heart of the center, open to the sky, where people could sit and say names aloud. No one would interrupt. No one would write them down. No one needed to. Speaking them was enough. The center opened 2 years later. Eli cut the ribbon alongside Karen and Julia. But before the guests arrived, before the speeches and news crews, he slipped away to the tree one more time. The branches had stretched outward, reaching toward the building.
Ik knelt, pressing a hand to the earth.
I kept my promise, he whispered. I remembered. And then I built. As he stood, the wind passed through the leaves like a breath. He smiled. That night, standing on the center's rooftop garden, Eli looked up at the stars, his heart full. Not with grief. Not with anger. But with presence. He thought of all the names. Rebecca. Karen.
Julia.
The children whose voices had once been dismissed. The survivors who had taught him how to listen. The forgotten who had found their way into murals, books, gardens, dreams. And his own.
Ellie Monroe. A name once lost.
Now planted, rooted, grown. Forever among those that bloom.